Yes, and I will be speaking on the topic of mainstreaming the disability perspective in Barbados. As would have been indicated before, I am the director here of the National Disabilities Unit, which is the local public organization looking after the welfare for persons with disabilities. And I want to place everything in context by stating basically that there are over 11,500 persons with disabilities in Barbados. This figure was sourced from the national census, Barbados National Census. Of these persons, 4,960 are men and 6,586 are women. They comprise about 4.2% of the total population, and of these, 7% are of school age. 41% are of employment age, and 48% are over age 65. I guess you can concur that the older you get, the more likely you are able to develop a disability. In looking at the disability perspective, some of you may know that there are four different perspectives in terms of disabilities. There's the moral perspective, the medical perspective, rehabilitation perspective, and the disability perspective, which we will be looking at this morning. The moral perspective basically is regards disability as a result of a sin. I guess that's the first pretty ancient outlook of disability. The medical model of disability regards disability as a defect or sickness. And rehabilitation regards disability as a deficiency that must be fixed by a rehabilitation professional. The disability perspective regards disability as a normal aspect of life, not as deviance, and rejects the notion that persons with disabilities are in some inherently defective. Just excuse me 1 second. Now, the moral approach was prominent, as I would have indicated before. That is now basically archaic, an archaic approach to looking at disabilities. The medical perspective, although it still exists or is still prominent within the medical sphere, it is slowly dissipating. The rehabilitative perspective was short-lived. And the disability perspective, especially in Barbados, is now more prominent. In terms of Barbados, some of the major challenges faced by persons with disabilities are employment, education, health, transportation, stigma, communication, and rehabilitative services, as well as recreational activities. These are some of the issues that persons with disabilities have major challenges with. Some of our responses to these challenges include the implementation, or what guides our responses to these challenges include the implementation of international conventions and policies, programs and services through the National Disabilities Unit, which is the organization that I represent here in Barbados, programs and services of the health care institutions and of educational institutions. Then you also have the intervention for civil society organizations, and the major one is the umbrella organization called the Barbados Council for the Disabled. And of course, there will be individual advocacy for those persons with disabilities who seek to advocate for their conditions or their circumstances to be addressed. Some of the major initiatives undertaken by Barbados in response to the amount of challenges faced by persons with disabilities is that Barbados would have signed the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2007 and ratified it in 2013. Only last year, we would have implemented or developed rather, a national policy on persons with disabilities. This would guide the response for persons with disabilities. Legislation was enacted in 2025. Actually, in February this year, we enacted legislation to protect the rights of persons with disabilities. And in 2024, the amount of benefits, national insurance benefits to persons with disabilities was expanded from the blind and the deaf and hard of hearing without speech to include persons with autism, persons with multiple sclerosis, persons with Down syndrome, persons with cerebral palsy. The amount of benefit that they get is somewhere in the region of about $450 per month. We are now in the process of seeking to expand those benefits to include those persons whose disabilities preclude them from being engaged in productive employment. Most recently, we would have completed our first report on the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2025. This is some 11 to 12 years after it became first due, after we would have ratified the convention. Our response has been, in my opinion, tremendous over the past couple of years, and this is primarily as a result of the political will of the current government administration is very serious in terms of responding to the needs of persons with disabilities. This is in spite of the fact that the government organization to address issues faced by persons with disabilities was established in 1997. We have had expansion of assistance to persons with disabilities in social protection programs. I'm talking about monetary assistance in terms of physical aids, transportation, to address all those issues that would have raised and some of the challenges facing persons with disabilities. We have within our Ministry of Labour a program where we are also seeking to give work experience to persons with disabilities. Barbados also signed in February 2024 the Marrakesh Treaty, which basically gives the country or gives persons with disabilities, particularly those persons who are blind, access to copyrighted material without any copyright infringement. And this is done through the World Copyright Association. And we would have signed that treaty in February 2024. In addition to that, in terms of from the disability perspective, we were seeking disability as a social barrier rather than as a medical condition alone. We've introduced a national policy and supported the legislation to help to reduce those barriers and challenges that persons with disabilities face. Some of those structural barriers that we seek to remove are addressed through the national policy, obviously. We will also introduce the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. Some of those challenges are also addressed through the economic policy, as I would have mentioned before, the increase in grants to persons with disabilities. Health policy, through the acquisition of various health monitoring equipment and different provisions to monitor the conditions faced by persons with disabilities. The labor policy, like I just mentioned, which would seek to ensure that more persons with disabilities are employed. Barbados is currently going through a process of education reform because we do have about 8 institutions of about 22 secondary schools. Secondary schools are catered generally for persons between ages 10 and 18 years old. And then our primary schools cater for persons between age 5 and 10 to 11 years old. And there are about near 100 primary schools and 22 secondary schools. But within the secondary school setting and the primary school setting, we have about 8 classes or 8 special units to cater for children with disabilities. The other policies that also seek to address the issues faced by persons with disabilities from a disability perspective, and these include our national sports policy, which basically ensures that or seeks to encourage the participation of persons with disabilities in the various sports. A national gender policy that looks at how policies or programs affect persons with disability from a gender perspective. Our housing policy, government has recently announced that they will allocate 10% to all housing projects. 10% of those units will be allocated to persons with disabilities. I would have indicated before as well that we have national insurance provisions. There are currently 6 categories of persons who benefit from national insurance provisions. Social assistance grants receive financial assistance. I think we have about just over 2,000 persons on our social assistance register, and they receive financial assistance on a monthly basis. We also cater for persons with disabilities or disaster management plan. You may recognize that Barbados is in the hurricane zone, and between June and November each year, we are more likely to have a hurricane or some kind of natural disaster, and we do have provisions in place to address issues that would affect persons with disabilities, like emergency transportation and relocation from areas that may be prone to flooding. Our inclusion efforts, we seek to put programs in place as well to ensure that persons are able to interact with persons with disabilities. The picture you're seeing is our Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs. This is at a sign language graduation. She herself is an amputee, and she would have participated in our sign language course. We primarily target those persons who have relatives who are deaf or hard of hearing. In addition to that, we would have had the Flower Project. They would train persons for employment and entrepreneurship. In addressing the whole issue of accessibility and to promote inclusion, we are currently in the process of doing an audit of all government-occupied buildings so to ensure that they're accessible for persons with disabilities, not only in terms of physical access, but also in terms of signage, communication, etc. Sports events and cultural events and recreational activities also receive our attention to ensure that persons with disabilities can readily access these services. Some of our successful initiatives are in terms of inclusion or inclusionary efforts, because years ago, we hardly used to see persons with disabilities. They had this perspective where this traditional approach to persons with disabilities where these persons were not seen and families would basically hide them away from the general population because there was a perceived stigma against persons with disabilities. We have had a significant success as well in the area of healthcare, in education, employment training, communication, which was aided significantly by the onset of technological advances. And we also have some rehabilitative services both within the institutions that provide healthcare as well in the community setting. The impact of these policies basically have been very significant. We have been able to change some of the public attitudes, which was social in its onset, and we have continued through public awareness programs in order to change public attitudes towards persons with disabilities. We have seen an increased amount of persons with disabilities participating in all types of activities, even in terms of the political process. We currently have one person with a disability in our parliament. We're seeking at a continuous effort incrementally to improve the built environment, sidewalks, access to all public spaces to ensure that persons with disabilities are not left behind. This particular group population also have been able to have greater independence. There's not so much reliance on caregivers and other persons so that they can meet their particular needs. More persons with disabilities are becoming employed, and more resources have been made available to assist these persons. The government in 2023 would have increased the grant and the subventions to non-governmental organizations by 40%. So those organizations, including the Council for the Disabled, which is a government entity, the umbrella organization over these NGOs, they would have received an increase, as well as those individual organizations like the Autism Association, the Multiple Sclerosis Society. They would have had an increase of over 40% to the subventions that they receive from government on an annual basis. Generally speaking, and in conclusion, the government of Barbados is committed to mainstreaming the disability perspective in its social policies and programs. That this is through the application of the national policy that is buttressed with the legislation, and this ensures that there are sustainable and long-term actions to improve the lives of persons with disabilities. Finally, through partnerships with local, regional, and international public, private, and civil society organizations, interventions that enhance the quality of life of persons with disabilities will continue to remain on the top of government's agenda. And of course, this will be facilitated through collaboration with non-governmental organizations as well as individual persons through philanthropic efforts. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That is Barbados' approach to mainstreaming disability, the disability perspective in Barbados' policies and programs.
Thank you very much, Director Hollingsworth, for your meaningful presentation about the experience in Barbados in mainstreaming the disability perspective in social policy. Me informan mis colegas que estamos presentando un retraso con el tiempo de este evento.
Our colleagues are telling us that we're delayed. We have some time constraints, so we're going to move on directly to Gloria Cerrón Cañuelas' presentation. She's the head of the Evaluation Department and National Service Studies for Disabilities in the Social Development and Family Ministry in Chile, and she'll share the transversal perspective for social policies for disability in